Promise not to sing, so we'll all be relieved. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Mark Brownstein. I got to know Mark over the last year as we worked together on the National Petroleum Council Coordinating Subcommittee for the North American Resource Study. And I've been very impressed with Mark and thought he'd be a really important addition to the conference. And there's two things that have impressed me about Mark. First is the breadth of his experience and perspective, and the second is his statesmanship. If you look at the program brochure and you see Mark's bio, you'll see a really interesting bio. He started out as a congressional aide. He's been an environmental regulator. He's been a director of strategy for a major utility. And most recently, he is the deputy director of the energy program for the Environmental Defense Fund. And he's really their key guy on natural gas issues. It's unusual to have someone who has that kind of experience. And what that, I think, creates in Mark is the statesmanship. Mark knows how to speak in languages that all of us can understand. That is something that I think is important. And one of the things that we need to do as industry is listen. So with that, Mark Brownstein.
So the diversity of job experiences either means I'm a statesman or I can't hold a job. Thank you for inviting me to be here. I've really enjoyed participating in this conference and listening to all of you, both in these formal sessions, but also walking around the trade floor. It's really been a privilege for me to be able to spend some time with you all and learn from you and get your perspectives. I want to start by telling you a little story. This summer, both of my two children went off to summer camp, and it was the first time in 12 years that my wife and I were kidless. To celebrate, immediately after we dropped the kids off at summer camp, we hightailed it to the Adirondack Mountains, which is another special place, for some quality adult time. We stayed in a rustic hotel where dinner was served punctually at 6 p.m., and it was all family style. So you sat at these large tables, and you were seated each night with a different set of guests. That's the way the hotel host wanted it to be. We stayed there for 4 nights. And wouldn't you know it that each night, fracking came up in the discussion. Okay? Now, mind you, at no time did I divulge who I was or what I did for a living. Okay? These were folks who were on holiday from places like Buffalo and Syracuse and Schenectady. There was one gentleman and his wife who were part of a Christian evangelical motorcycle club based in East Texas, and they were touring the U.S. for the summer, and they were stopping in the Adirondacks on their tour. And of all the things that we could have talked about at dinner, these folks wanted to talk about fracking. And you know what? No one was for it. Not a one. The Christian evangelical motorcycle guy was actually the most strident opponent of all. Seems he grew up on a sheep ranch in New Mexico and had some personal history with the oil and gas industry out there. And at some point, the well water got ruined on the family ranch. You can't trust those guys for a minute, he told me. So, okay, I know that this is not a scientific sampling of public attitudes towards the gas industry or fracking. But this should worry you, because these aren't the folks who are getting their news from the New York Times or the Huffington Post, and yet the news they are getting isn't good. There's a real problem here. It may be an overstatement to say that no one trusts you, but it's darn certain that the natural gas industry has huge credibility problems right now. And you shouldn't allow yourself for a moment to be lulled into the idea that it's just a few left-wing, tofu-eating, renewable energy-loving, latte-sipping, cave dwellers from San Francisco who are causing all the fuss. I live in suburban New Jersey, and people I talk to look at me like I'm nuts every time I try to explain what it is that you do and how you do it, and why it's important. Whether you like it or not, you are living in a post-Macondo era, and based on that experience, folks aren't all that ready to accept that you all actually know what you are doing and that the processes that you're using are safe. And frankly, they don't distinguish between oil and gas guys any more than probably most of you distinguish between environmentalists. So how do we change all this? Well, first, you got to give people the data. The fight we've had over the last 2 years over full disclosure of frac fluid, the chemicals used in frac fluid, has damaged your credibility right out of the box. On the one hand, industry claims that no harm to public health or the environment can possibly come from the frac fluid, but then no one's willing to tell you what's in it. The industry claims that natural gas is better for the climate than coal or oil, but won't provide any of the data on the amount of methane that is vented or which leaks through production and distribution, data that is critical to substantiating natural gas's advantage over coal or oil on a full life cycle basis. And because you don't provide the data, other people fill in the void with information or stories that suit their version of the truth. The only way that you can change that reality is by being open and transparent with data. On frac fluid, for example, this means disclosing every chemical, not just OSHA-regulated chemicals, every chemical, and disclosing not just the name, but the volume being used per site, and doing so in a fashion that the public can easily search and obtain data on the chemicals that are being used in their community. Everyone needs to do this, not just self-appointed progressives in the industry. Now, we tend to think that the only way that that kind of universal comprehensive disclosure is going to happen is through some combination of state or federal regulation. But actually, I invite you to prove me wrong. On fugitive emissions, this means comprehensive monitoring and measurement from the point of production to the burner tip. You don't like the estimates coming out of Cornell? Take the time and effort to gather your own data, real data, monitored, measured data, and throw that on the table. Second, there is a real need to set clear standards and demonstrate accountability to those standards. And there are three pieces to this puzzle. The first piece is regulation. Our view is that improving the quality of state regulation is paramount, and not just the substance of regulation, but the resources necessary to develop good permits in a timely way and be able to have trained inspectors in the field commensurate with the level of activity going on in the field. And with appropriate citizen suit provisions as a backstop in the event that watchful enforcement is not forthcoming from the state. We have a number of thoughts on how to strengthen state regulation and enforcement, and they're too numerous and tedious to go into here right now. But suffice it to say that while some states do a much better job than others, all states can improve the quality of the regulatory work that they do, particularly because this is such a dynamic industry. Even the best regulators will need to work hard to keep up, and this is why we strongly support investing additional resources and expertise in organizations like Stronger. The second piece is what the industry should do to share EH&S related practices among each other, among yourselves, along with mechanisms that you can use to raise the standard of practice from the largest to the smallest players. And most importantly, ways to hold each other accountable for embracing these leading practices and the culture of continuous improvement that goes along with them. For all of the attention that fracking has received, you all know that the real pathways to groundwater pollution are poor cement casing, inadequate stormwater management, and sloppy handling of frack chemicals and flowback water at the surface. And these are not technical issues so much as they are management and worker training issues. And the good news is that's completely within your control. But know this, your public reputation is only as good as the last well completed, and the worst performer in the bunch will greatly influence what the public thinks about the rest of you. As a matter of your own business self-interest, you should have no tolerance for chuckleheads in your midst. And you need industry-sponsored mechanisms to make sure that everyone flies right. The third piece is community engagement, and I don't mean the usual dog and pony shows where you explain what you do and how you do it. Public education, of course, is very important, and I encourage you to do more of it. But what I'm talking about is working with communities to develop plans tailored to those communities that reduce land use impact and address quality of life problems like noise and dust. Some of you do this, I know, but not all of you do. And all of you should. And you should not only be willing to sit down with communities and negotiate these agreements, but you should actually make these agreements enforceable between you and the communities, so the communities know that you're committed to what you're planning to do. Third, and finally, the public wants to know that you are aggressively pursuing ways to reduce pollution and reduce environmental risk. I'm a former corporate EH&S guy, as my resume indicates, and so I know the value of a good emission reduction target in motivating innovation and improving performance. The industry should be willing to stand up and say what risks will be reduced over what time frame. Perhaps it's a goal of fugitive methane emissions, a goal of, should I say, zero fugitive methane emissions from production through burner tip by, say, 2025? How about a commitment that by 2020, all frac fluids will be completely non-toxic? We've got some ideas on how to set targets, but fundamentally these goals should be meaningful, and they should be a little bit of a stretch. That's the way in which you motivate innovation and give confidence to the public that you're actually striving to improve performance. There's not a question that public commitments to reducing risk and being willing to publicly measure progress over time is critically important to substantiating your claims to being good environmental stewards. This is part and parcel of convincing people that you're serious about being on the right path. The bottom line is this. I know, having been on the corporate side myself, right, that none of you go to work with the intention of harming public health and the environment. Okay? You all have families. Many of you do business in the communities in which you live. Many of you, I know, are committed outdoorsmen. And I bet even a few of you are actually environmentalists at heart. But the American public cannot get to know each of you individually any more than you can get to know each member of the American public individually. And so all of your best intentions need to be translated into tangible data and actions that people can see and assess for themselves. Trust but verify, as the saying goes. Thank you. And I think we've got time for questions or comments or dialogue, and so I look forward to that. Man, I did nothing to get you guys to jump up at the microphone. I failed.